Thunderbird's our go.
Hi, everybody. Here we are again. My name's Jacquie Aitken, and I'm the Heritage Officer and Digital Curator at Timespan, and we're based in Helmsdale in East Sutherland. And I'm here today to talk about the Iron Age in Kildonan and show you some amazing, our amazing reconstruction model that we've made in partnership with the Open Virtual World team at the University of St Andrews. This work was undertaken as part of the CINE project, which is See the Past, Imagine the Future. And ourselves and the University of St Andrews are two of the 9 partners investigating the immersive worlds of digital reconstructions. Let's go back to the Iron Age in Kildonan. And just before I begin, I'm just going to say there's quite a lot of information about research that we've undertaken. So in advance, I've put all the links into the chat feed of the Facebook live stream, so you can find it all there. Just if you're thinking, where did we get that bit of information? So the Iron Age in Kildonan. So I think I'm just going to, so here is our first slide. So I'm going to talk about the location and the site that we selected for digitizing. So the site that we selected it's in the parish of Kildonan in the county of Sutherland. You can see just a little map in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and there's a little pin showing the location of Helmsdale. And the actual site itself, it's actually a bit inland. So the Roundhouse site that we chose, it's situated about 4 miles inland from the coast, up the Kildonan Strath, where the Kye Burn meets the River Helmsdale. So the Valley of Kildonan itself was shaped several thousand years earlier by the action of large glaciers moving across the land, and it scoured out the valley floor and left deposits of loose rock and stone on the surface as the ice melted. And you can clearly see that on the aerial view showing that windy river valley and where the glaciers scoured out and leaving the hills on either side. The upland soils are covered in peat, and you can kind of clearly see the areas of green grass as opposed to the much darker browns and purples of the peat in the aerial view. So the peat is of varying depths, and you can actually find the stumps of pine trees from the old native woodland forests that formed at the end of the last ice age. And we can often see peat eroding out, quite deep depths of peat in these areas. The land today is actually covered in a peaty heather moorland, but there's not many native trees anymore, and there are herds of red deer that actually graze the areas that we're looking at. I think we're just going to move on to our next slide now. So just a few more introductory views to give you the context for the archaeological site that we chose to digitize. So on your left-hand side, we located all the archaeology in the Iron Age in this area. So it wasn't just one roundhouse. There was quite a few archaeological sites that we uncovered. Can we move to the next slide, Ian, please? There we go. And as you can see from this slide, there was quite a lot of Iron Age sites that we could have selected for digitization, and not just roundhouses either. We've got brocks and we've got souterrains and we've got burnt mounds. We've got a whole collection of sites, and this itself is a multi-period landscape as well. And we got all this information from the the historic environment record, which is our local authorities' archaeology database. And it's a very useful tool to use as well in identifying archaeological sites where you live. And that's one of the references I put into the feed for this live event that you can find. So the site that we've chosen is, it's quite, it is above the Cayenne Burn, and it is, it's about 90 meters above sea level, and it sits on the hillside above the burn itself. And I think we'll move to the next slide, please, Ian. And so this map, it's just one of our more modern maps of the area, and the roundhouse that we are selected for digitization is actually one of a group of 3. As you look at the map, it is on the left-hand side, and it is about 2/3 of the way up the map. There's a group of 3 roundhouses together, and this one is a hut circle and souterrain, as it's labelled on the map itself. Now, so we had chosen our roundhouse. This is a very good example of a roundhouse. I mean, it's unexcavated, so we can't really label a specific period, but we say Iron Age, early, mid, late. We can give it some kind of, I think mid-Iron Age is probably more likely. And so we want to know what actually lies on the ground today. So when you go up to this site today, what did we start off with? What was there on the landscape? So there were excavations that took place in Kildonan in 1968, and a Horace Fairhurst actually did excavations of roundhouses, and he gives a very good description of what's there to see today. Can we move to the next slide now, Ian? So there we go. So this is what Horace says about these hut circles that we find on the ground today. The visible remains on the ground is called a hut circle, which comprise a simple ring-like enclosure delineated by a bank of earth and stones or boulders, usually much overgrown. If you can just make out, there are a few bold, larger stones sticking out from the turf and stone wall, and you can see about maybe 3/4 of the hut circle in that view. And in the distance, you can see the river valley winding the way down. That's the Helmsdale River, right down to the village of Helmsdale and to the sea, the North Sea beyond. So that really is the site that we decided that that's the site that had was really had all the prerequisites for our digital reconstruction, and it was, you know, so we started our process with this. Just to say about this particular monument, so it's got protected status. So it's designated a scheduled ancient monument by Historic Environment Scotland, which means it is, well, it's allegedly, it's supposed to be protected against any intrusive work or commercial development. So the site plus a particular its scheduled area or curtilage is protected. And there are another 2 hut circles that lie very near this one as well. It's hard to say that they were contemporary without excavating the sites, and sometimes it's too easy to imply that hut circles in close proximity to each other that were occupied at the same time. And I think that's maybe very misleading. I think we've got to take it on an individual basis for each hut circle and what evidence we have available for that. So it is a multi-period landscape. It's got over 5,000 to 6,000 years of occupation going back to Neolithic times. And so can we move on to our next slide? Thank you. So we developed a research model using the archaeological evidence. So basically, to start the digitization process, it was important to gather up what information was available about our particular Iron Age roundhouse, but also what is the body of knowledge around the Iron Age and these types of structures. And we thought that would be the most useful approach to help in the digitization process. And we came at it, I suppose, like any other archaeologist would put together a research proposal before excavating a site. So we posed some of our research questions, we gathered all the known evidence of the site, and we identified the people that would be the most relevant skills sets to work on the project. And that involved ourselves as curators working on the museum side of things. We have our digital team and our modelers, and then we have other people who have other skills, maybe bringing a more theoretical approach to the digitization as well. So yeah, it was interesting, the people that we needed to work on this project. So so to do this, we gathered a lot of information, and the main source of information for the Iron Age in Scotland is the Scottish Archaeology Research Framework, or SCARF, which is an online resource that contains contributions from members of an Iron Age panel, providing information on the current state of knowledge about the Iron Age in Scotland through excavation and research. This body of research for the Highlands is currently under review by Arch, and it's being undertaken to better reflect regional differences and to include all the latest excavation and environmental sampling results since the last review. And we're delighted that conversations about reconstructing digital archaeological sites through immersive technology, unlike the models we're showing you today, is going to be included as part of a resource on the new HiArc website for the Highland area. So that's something quite exciting to look forward to. And as well, we looked at other sources of information. There was can we move to the next slide, please, Ian? So another source of information was a survey done in Kildonan by the Royal Commission in 1993, and it provided a categorisation for our Roundhouse site. So the Royal Commission was calling this a category 2-3 type. So basically stating that the Roundhouse itself was located on a poorer ground, less intensive activity, intermittent occupation, and was really on the fringes of occupation. So it was exploited, the side valley was exploited less intensively as maybe some of the other areas in Kildonan. Other useful sources of information we looked at were the excavations at Lurg between 1988 and 1992, and the extensive research by Anna Welty documenting the stone roundhouses of Wester Ross and parts of Skye. And we looked at various roundhouse excavation reports from antiquarian times to the current day. And so how helpful was the excavation evidence? Well, can we move to the next slide, please? We'll try and move through this quickly so you can see the model. So the excavation reports and the post-excavation analysis can be very helpful, but there are many gaps in the process as well, because parts of sites are missing, they've been robbed, they've changed over time, and they're just literally not there. Some of the organic materials from finds of sites, they just don't survive the acidic conditions of our soils. And also we need to consider the interpretation of the evidence as well. I mean, interpretations are never static and they're never totally accurate, and they're constantly being updated and revised as new evidence comes to light. And that's a hugely important process that the digital models like the one we're going to show you can really be a part of that process, providing a quick way of showing updates in evidence sets. So the Roundhouse site in the reconstruction, it has not been excavated. So how were we able to reconstruct a Roundhouse site that we didn't have any finds, or we didn't know what the structure looked like under the turf and grass? Well, we used a comparative site to do this. So we were able to draw on the excavation results from a nearby comparative site at Kilfeder, and this is where Horace Fairservice Horace Fairhurst had actually done his excavations. So he actually found that a lot of the features in this particular roundhouse that you're looking at on the screen, Hut Circle 5 from Kilfedder, was very similar. In fact, he included in his report how similar it was to the roundhouse that we surveyed up at Caen and we used for our digital reconstruction. So we'll move on to our model. So I think, so sorry, just this one here, yeah. So these are just some of the excavation photographs from Horace Fairhurst's excavation. And this gives you some idea of what we had on the ground at Caen before we went about doing the digital reconstruction. Thanks very much, Ian. And I think, and there we see one of the features of these some of the roundhouses that the Royal Commission recorded up at Kilfedder and Kildonan have these very extended entrance ways and quite thick, up to 3 meters long, these extended passageways leading into the roundhouse. So these are quite unique features of the roundhouse that we digitize. Thank you very much, Ian. So I think that we'll move on to the model itself, and we'll take we're going to come down on to, so this is the this is looking at the landscape in the Iron Age. So we're going to go back in time now, and this is our first venture into what life was like in Caen, in Kildonan, in the Iron Age. Well, the Iron Age landscape over 2,000 years ago was partly covered with dense vegetation growing along the steep river banks and over the hill slopes, providing shelter for wild animals and birds. We would have had deer, wild boar and wolves. The native woodlands comprised tall Scots pine interspersed with birch and hazel and a few oak on the perimeter, providing vital resources for domestic building materials and fuel. But the higher up the slope you get, as you can see in this view here as we approach the Roundhouse settlement, you can see that all the wood has gone from this area, and we'll chat about that a little bit later. So the Iron Age farmers who settled in these upland areas lived in round stone dwellings called roundhouses. And Kildonan has been recorded as having over 350 roundhouse hut circles, indicating a significant population over an extended period of time. And again, the slightly warmer temperatures in the Iron Age or by the Iron Age that gradually got cooler may account for the presence of some roundhouses at higher altitudes in the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age as well. And there's a nice view as we pan around the landscape at our particular roundhouse site and what we would see. Ian, could we possibly just even take it down just a little bit further and just pan quite slowly around so you can see the level of woodland. Higher up, there's very little woodland, but we do have the roundhouse occupying higher sites. And then down in the river valleys and also on, you know, sort of much and lower down the hills, we start seeing more trees about below the 60-meter level, possibly a bit too many trees, but it just gives you a fair idea that there, even by the Iron Age, quite a lot of the woodlands had been cut down higher up the hills, but also that had something to do with the climate change and the peat blanket as well. So that's quite nice. And you can see those big, tall pine trees with their really tall trunks, and they're really important as a resource for building the roundhouse frames and roofs themselves. So we talked about, so there was a particular, the Scarf Review records that there was a climate deterioration in the late 2nd millennium BC and the early 1st millennium BC, some areas becoming blanketed in peat, even before the roundhouses went out of use. So while these roundhouse communities were farming in these areas, there was already, you know, the areas above these roundhouses were pretty much, you know, converted to peat in the Bronze Age as well. So they were, as the climate's changed, it certainly impacted on some of the roundhouses in these higher locations. So I think that's nice, and we'll just stop it there for a minute. And what would be, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the actual construction of the roundhouse itself. So how did we go about actually, from the archaeological evidence, from what we knew and what we didn't know about the site, how did we go about reconstructing the roundhouse exterior itself? So what we can see is the walls, and we can see the roof. So just as, so I must at this point talk about Sarah Kennedy, who was my kind of partner in this, my digital partner who made the model. And she has created a little how to make a roundhouse GIF. And I think we're just going to play that to you now. And it's just a quick, it's a very quick stop animation, just showing you the construction process from the digital developer's point of view. So this kind of just shows you how Sarah went about building the roundhouse from the ground up. You can see that she obviously started from the plan on the ground. She's built a frame around it. She's got the sides, the diameter, she's built the walls, and then she's put the roof on top. And you can see how we've actually, you can see there as well that there is a roof that has gone on, or the first bit of the structure that has gone onto there. And that roof is really far too low. Yeah, and you can see the roof has just gone really high there. So we started off with quite a low pitched roof, and then we have increased the roof pitch significantly. We'll come on to that in a little minute. So there we have the ground plan, the diameter. We've got a first roof, not very good. We have our walls, we have our doorway, we have our extended doorway, and then we've got a big pitched roof on there. So that's kind of, I must admit, this was a very tricky thing to build this longhouse. And there was a lot of dilemmas. And lots of thought had to go into how we approached the reconstruction of walls that don't conform to right angles and are quite thick, and also roofs that don't exist, and basically how, you know, what would be the appropriate or the right pitch on the roof to support our particular roundhouse. So thank you for that, Ian. And I think what we'll do now is we're just going to have a little look. Yeah, so that's great. So we're on to our slide now. So the first part of the roundhouse reconstruction process was I needed to create a ground plan for our archaeological site, so our Hat Circle up at Caen, to obtain a ground plan and, more importantly, the measurements, and to get the actual shape of the roundhouse. And we did this, and this was a community co-production project, the Cine project. So we worked with our local community heritage groups, and you can see just on the slide there we are up in the snow, up at the Caen Roundhouse, and we are surveying the structure. And in the other side of the slide at the bottom, you can see a very simple measured plan showing it was about 10.5 meters in diameter, and it was slightly, it wasn't a complete circle, it was slightly elongated along the one of the axes. And so we could see at the site that it was that it was very much reduced earth and stone walls. We could see some of the large stones in situ, as you can see where we're actually measuring that stone. We could see the entranceway, and we could see a lot of rubble. And that's about it. But there was no standing building or roof. So we started to kind of think, well, actually, we've got enough, we can't see very much. So we started off thinking we would be able to do this quite easily, and it became quite a tricky process, because the more we looked at the site, the less we knew about it, even using the comparative evidence from the Kilfedder roundhouse. And also, that didn't give us any indication about the height of the walls, and indeed the pitch of the roof as well. So we'll just go back to the tour of the roundhouse, Ian. Oh yeah, we'll just go to the tour of the roundhouse. So what I'd like to do now is just very, very slowly, Ian, I just want to take a tour right around the roundhouse so you can see the walls and the roof. If we can just take, and I'll just tell you a little bit about it as we go around it. So the roundhouses in the Scottish upland landscapes were mainly made of stone and turf walls. And this was unlike the roundhouses the counterparts you see in the south of the country. And a first century, I presume, Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BC, and he was talking about the British inhabitants and their roundhouses, and he talked about them living in mean dwellings made from the most part of reeds and wood. But I think if he'd been observing the roundhouses in the north of Scotland, he would definitely have to add stone to that description. And they also have these conical thatched roofs. Well, do they? Not very much evidence survives, even when we look at the body of research about these thatched roofs. So that has been the typical interpretation of the archaeological evidence, and indeed the other theoretical approaches. But it certainly isn't the only type of roof it could have had, but it's likely. Yeah, extended walls. So the conical roof itself would have extended over the walls, providing shelter and protection from the elements. Some of the roundhouses in Kildonan exhibit regional features, as we said before, including the thickening of the walls, and that kind of allows you to have this porch leading in with this pathway at the front. So this extended pathway kind of creates a special space in between the outside of the roundhouse and then the space on the interior of the roundhouse itself. And we don't know, but maybe these passageways have some special ritual significance on entering the house. The job of building the house would have been, oh, we're in the house now. I think we might come out again, Ian, if you don't mind, because we're just going to go and talk about. So the job of building the house would have been a family effort, with everybody playing their part in the construction. And so, yeah, sorry, in fact, we are just going to go just into the doorway, if you don't mind, Ian. You were right, I apologise. So we're just going to look at the post holes there. So looking at the roof construction, which gave us the digital reconstruction gave us a great opportunity to explore roundhouse roofs and basically what type of roof would have supported the roundhouse that we had. So there was evidence in Horace Fairhurst's excavation report from Kilfedder that there was a circle ring of post holes on the ground level, indicating these posts that would have been inserted on the interior of the building to hold the heavy roof frame above. The massive roof of the roundhouse was made using large wooden timbers forming a ring supporting a conical roof frame covered in turf and thatch. And archaeological evidence indicates that there possibly, well, we don't know, but was there a chimney? Probably not. So it must have been quite a sooty interior and all quite smoky inside. Now, if we come out again, Ian, we're just going to look at the pitch of the roof itself. That's nice. So we get a little bit closer. Yep. Maybe round the side a bit. Yeah. That's good. So using a we'll just keep on panning around, Ian, just slowly would be lovely. Using a theoretical approach to the roof pitch, we were working along the lines that a steeper roof pitch would shed more water and increase the life of the roof itself. And as the size of the roundhouse increases, the surface space and the weight increases disproportionately. So the bigger the roundhouse, the steeper and bigger the roof that you would require. And they also required the longest timbers that were available. So possibly the limit on the size of a roundhouse was dependent on the timbers that were available in the nearby woodlands that you had. And so in Kildonan, we've kind of gone for in between a 45 and a 50% pitch on the roof, which we feel would have supported the roundhouse and actually also supported that extension on the entranceway as well. So this is what we've opted for. But if new evidence comes to light, we can go back to the roundhouse model and we can change it. And as you can see from the little video we played, we can put different roofs onto this roundhouse and test them out. So that'd be quite something that I really feel that these digital reconstructions really come to the fore when it comes to experimenting with and interpreting the evidence what we have from archaeological sites, especially in these types of features, construction features. Okay, so it's a really nice roof we have there. So yeah, I think we've done that now. So we'll probably take a little look inside the roundhouse now. I think everybody's just keen. So we'll just come down a little bit and we'll just, yeah, so we'll just stop there for the second. So we'll just sort of talk about this. So when it comes to excavating sites, there's even less evidence for interior structures. So we again rely on other excavations to tell us what was the arrangements of features inside the roundhouse itself. What was the divisioning? What was the layout and the division of space in the interior? So from Horace Fairhurst's excavation, he found at Culfeder that there was rough paving leading inside the roundhouse, and there was a possible sillstones demarcating the area between the inside of the roundhouse, just the doorway, and then the floor inside the roundhouse. So there certainly was this idea that in Iron Age times that there were special areas within the roundhouse had its purpose. And if we come away from that now, Ian, and we'll take a little bit, we'll step a little bit further into the roundhouse and we'll try and get into the internal floor area. Here we go into the roundhouse, lovely. Brilliant. And we'll just stop there for a second. That's a really nice view. And then we'll do a little 360 look around. So we believe from excavation results in the area that it was probably a hard earth floor with packed cobbles interspersed throughout, probably areas of flat stones around the central hearth working area where a lot of the activity would be taking place. And Horace Fairhurst also found lots of flecks of charcoal and pottery strewed on the perimeter of the floor area as well. And if we can come and have a look at the hearth area that has been reconstructed inside this roundhouse here. So that's a nice view. Thank you very much, Ian. So yeah, Horace again, he found it was actually a rectangular base shape to the hearth in the roundhouses at Culfeder, and it was a cobbled surface with curbstones on top. Our fireplace may be a little big for the setting, but certainly these are consistent with the measurements from the roundhouse at Culfeder, and actually creates quite a nice working area for cooking and other domestic tasks. And the floor around the hearth was probably, as we said, it was probably cobbled to take the heavy activity that, or the constant activity that would have been taking place daily. So the interior, so we're going to take a little, we're just going to take a little view around the interior now, Ian. So if you just go around very slowly, and then we'll talk about the divisions of the space here. So the interior of the roundhouse was the main living area, with a central stone hearth, berths for beds and stalls for cattle that you can see here. The inhabitants made their clothes by weaving raw wool on wooden looms, and there is a loom that we'll just come to in a second. And finds from Kildonan include spindle whorls, and these are little stone weights that are used with a stick, and they're used for spinning the wool. So we know that working with wool definitely was happening in Kildonan at this time. And there we have the loom there. And we also, oh, I think we're coming round to the loom, or it's, can we get round to the loom at all, Ian, to have a little look at it? That's nice. There we go. And I think there's even a few spindle whorls in the vicinity of the loom. Can we get a bit lower down? Yeah, that's lovely. Okay, so, and we've actually got quite a significant number of these spindle whorls that have been finds that have come from Kildonan, mainly from antiquarian times, and when things like the railway was being cut through Kildonan, and a lot of sites were disturbed. So, you know, that seems to be one of our commonest find from Kildonan. And also we'll move around to the cooking area again, because we have a lot of pots. So in the collections of finds we have from Kildonan, we have many sherds of pottery. We also have stone vessels, possibly drinking or eating vessels, and we also have stone lamps that have been carved to accommodate a wick and oil. So we have a lot of, and you can also see on that bench, we have the spindle whorls. The object that is in the foreground is the stone lamp. Then we have a spindle whorl. We've got a stone of unknown use. We've got an awl, like a possibly for a needle. And we've also got a stone vessel, and we've got a piece of a deer antler. We're just that could be some kind of digging, or we don't know what that's for. So a lot of these finds have these are the types of finds that we find in Kildonan associated with roundhouses, and indeed the roundhouse occupants' burials as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the objects in a little while, but before we do that, we're just going to continue the journey, and we're going to go outside now. So maybe before we go, could we take a look up at the roof structure, Ian? Could you move up and show everybody the roof structure, how that's been recreated? I think that's quite a nice view and you can see the smoke coming through the chimney. So we'll just spend a little moment going through those as you can see, all the roof timbers that are required. It's quite an interconnecting, massive structure to support the roundhouse. And those that ring of posts that we saw at ground level are hugely important because they're weight bearing, and the walls themselves in this roundhouse would not support this massive roof alone. Indeed, they probably take, you know, the posts take most of the force of the heavy roof. Okay, so we'll maybe come down a bit now, Ian, from the roof, because I think we're getting a little bit too high there. So if we can come down, that's nice. So so possibly, if you could hold it there, so possibly where you see those at the top of the ring of posts, you could feasibly have another, you could put a floor there. So you could actually put a floor at a higher level and create possibly a room in the roof, or maybe a loft space for storage. So that is a possibility. We've left it open so that you can actually see the structure itself. Okay, and so I think we're seeing what the time's doing. So we're going to move on. We're going to go outside and we're going to look at the farming. We're going to look at some fields. So the society in the Iron Age that we're looking at, so we'll just take it quite slowly, Ian. We're just going to stop it, just pan around quite slowly, and then we'll just have a little look around. So Kildonan in the Iron Age was probably part of a regional ruling province made up of groups of people living in small farming settlements along the river and tributary burns. Now, nearby, in fact, further up the strath, oh, that's a perfect view. So further up the strath, about 20 miles, we have two hill forts. We've got Ben Graham Beg and we've got Ben Graham Moor, much further up Kildonan. And we also have brocks as well. So these big windowless stone towers in the vicinity, and in fact there's a few, in fact there's one at Kilfedder which is just out of view over the hillside. So these are possibly the headquarters or the homes of the overlords or chiefs who lived in this. They were the people that probably organised land use, trade and events like ritual feasting or markets. The roundhouses themselves, these were the homes of the farmers and their families who lived together in small communities. So they grew crops, they reared animals, and they possibly spoke some of the ancient languages that possibly developed into Gaelic that we know today. As well. So what we'll come around to the fields there, and we're just going to have a look at the Iron Age fields very quickly here to see what they're growing. If we pan around, Ian, yeah, that's it, that's great. And we'll just, just if you could just pan around there just for a few seconds, that's great. So land use in the Iron Age was predominantly agricultural, with some small settled communities cultivating crops. And the main crop here is an early form of barley, and it's called 6-row barley, Hordeum vulgar. And this is quite an early strain of barley itself. And this is a later quote, but I quite like it because this is a nice view of it here. And this is a quote from 1793, and it says, it's from the statistical account from Loth. And it says, the soil is generally good and the arable part of it is in constant culture, producing a crop of bear every year as far back as the memory of the old men or even their fathers. And I just kind of like that quote because I wonder, you could take that quote back to Iron Age times. That's what was being grown here at that time as well. And it can be grown on a peaty soil, which this area probably was not the best fertile soil, as we saw from the Royal Commission's report. And it was used to produce, it could be ground to produce coarse flour, it could be distilled into alcohol. Barley was grown in Kildonan up until the 19th century, when the Sutherland landowners removed all the small farming tenants and replaced them with the big flocks of sheep at the time of the Highland clearances. And that was the end of the arable farming of this type of barley in Kildonan, which had been taking place for over 4,000 years. We also have, in fact, what we'll do is we'll take a quick look at the 6-row barley, so our viewers can see. Can we just go to that? And that is slide 14. Sorry, Ian. So this is where I'd like to introduce our Timespan exhibition. All the films that you're seeing as part of these events, you can see on our Timespan exhibition, which is Real Rights, all the digital content and all our themes that we're exploring around climate change and the colonial links between the Highlands with the Highlands. And on your left-hand side, that is a beautiful drawing, illustration, botanical specimen that's been drawn by our fellow member of staff, Vanilla, who's done a great job of showing what 6-row barley looks like. So it's the specimen on the left-hand side. And I would urge you to go into the exhibition and really explore it and see our other got 3 digital films in there and lots of great content. Okay, Ian, we'll come back to the actual model itself. And we're just going to so we've got animal husbandry taking place as well. You can see the these are the older forms of the sheep, like the soy sheep. We've got the small black cow. We've got pigs and goats. And we've got the odd horse as well, which may have been used for travel, but also we know that it was used for possibly food in hard times as well. And if we come outside the roundhouse, we can see that there is if we go up to the roundhouse entrance, there is a stock path. So a cattle or stock pathway. Lovely, ooh, nice flowers. And if we look down a little bit, so that is the pathway, and that's cobbled. And that is cobbled because it leads out. So we can see where that path leads to, Ian. And that path is leading to where the cattle are grazing. And that is where the inhabitants would lead the cattle back into shelter at night when there was lots of wild animals about, in and over winter as well in the building. So that's the stock path that where the cattle would have entered back into the longhouse itself. And then we're going to in fact, we're going to talk about the objects themselves. So if we're going to go back into the longhouse, roundhouse even. And I would just like to go to the bench where we saw that lovely collection of objects. And I'm just going to maybe pass over to our colleague with St Andrews. So Catherine, if you're there.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. So,
Hi.
Catherine, what's been really good is we had, in our Timespan collection, we had a whole group of Iron Age objects that have been found in various sites over the years. And we said to you guys, we would like these objects to be represented in the Roundhouse. I didn't really know what you would do, but could you maybe talk us through the process and what you did and maybe show us some of them?
Sure, absolutely. So we're lucky enough to be able to work with you guys who have a fabulous collection within your museum that has all this material relating to the roundhouses. So it's kind of a question of, all right, we can reconstruct this based off of the data that you've been talking about. But then we have this actual object. How can we put that back into its original context in the reconstruction? And so there's a few methods that we use, ranging from ones that you need a bit more specialist equipment to something that somebody can do with either in the museum with commodity items they already have or at home. So we use different digitization techniques. So I think with some of the objects, we might have used our laser scanner that uses a laser to bounce onto the object, bounce the laser back, and it calculates kind of as it goes around, it calculates the shape of the object and builds it itself. We also use a process called photogrammetry, which is from just using a camera and taking lots and lots of photos of the object, all planes of the object all the way around, and then using software to be able to build that together into an object as well. And so a different method, I think we also used structured light, which is similar to the laser, except it uses a pattern of light that is placed on the object, and it reads that information coming back to then build the object. But then what's really special is that then when you have that file, that 3D object file that looks very, very accurate as we can get it with the different processes, is that then it can go back into the original context and how it was used for. And I think that's something interesting, that when the object is in the collection, you know, we look at it in a different way. It's a remnant of a time that, you know, we don't have as much connection to. It might be a little bit celebrated as this object. And when we put it back into the context, you might realize it's completely ordinary, or it actually survived because it wasn't used that much. It wasn't broken because it wasn't used so much. And it was just kind of like, oh, it just got lost or something, you know. And I think that's a very fun thing to think about. But then we can actually put it back to, like you were saying about the spindle whorls, putting it back into the use of the weaving, the lamp, so it's actually being used, the oil lamp. And I think there's some pottery shards that we had that you didn't have the whole pot. So once it's been digitized, that pottery shard has been digitized, we then went through a process using other kind of material to have an idea of what it possibly could have looked like, looking at different pottery that, oh, okay, it might have looked this way, to then build around the object and make it whole again. So kind of making educated assumptions, but then having it back as a whole piece to show, you know, this is what it would have looked like, and we only have a bit of it. So that's really fun. So yeah, there's multiple layers. It's not just the building of the object, of the whole site and the landscape and the construction of the roundhouse, but also even those little details of the actual objects going right back in and becoming part of the original context and narrative again.
And I think this is really, I mean, you know, having been on quite a few excavations, and we, you know, we rarely get the opportunity to we ponder over these objects for hours, you know, at sites, thinking what could they have been used for, and you know, where would they have been. And I think this is just a great way of you know, trying to work out and have that conversation and see, does it, when it's placed, does it, you know, does it do the job? Is it in the right place? And we can move it around as well. So I think it's really it's exciting to actually not just think about objects as something in a you know, in an old storeroom that doesn't see the light of day, or even in a museum display that is just like this shrine in the middle of a shelf that, you know, it's very hard to have a conversation about its original use and placement in where it was. So I think it's really exciting. I think we're going to have a look at maybe one of those objects. In fact, it's the one that's closest to you, everybody, that you can see on the screen, that wonderful Iron Age vessel, I think we all call it, but it's decorated. Ian, have we got that object? This is the one that Catherine and Ian at St Andrews have digitized. So Catherine, what was the process you used for this object?
So I believe this one was laser scanned, if I remember correctly. And actually Ian could maybe, it was a bit ago, so I'm trying to remember. But so how we determine which process to use is based on the object, and sometimes just if we have a lot of objects to do, we might have a few processes going. But if the object is small, not too small, but small and can fit on the base for our laser scanner, that's a nice easy way to do it. But I'm actually thinking that maybe this was done by photogrammetry, because the texture, the photo texture that's been put back on the object is very realistic, and that is usually quite indicative of photogrammetry, because you are using photographs and high resolution photographs to then place back onto your 3D mesh that's built. And you can do that, and you can do photogrammetry with any sized object, from very small coins, buttons, different things, to you can large buildings using a drone or using ladders, large objects, standing stones. So it really has, it's very, has a lot of purposes to it that you can use. So yeah, I believe that is what it is. Stone is a great object because there are also certain objects that digitize better than others. If you have something that's clear, like glass, that's really difficult because you're seeing through the object, you're not actually seeing the object. And then things that if you can't move the object well around to be able to turn it, maybe turn it over on its side to get its base, you know, maybe it's fragile or it has moving parts that might not really work out that well. So we kind of joke that like stone is fabulous because stone holds its shape, you know, it has lots of textures to it. So when the software is trying to figure out where all the photos are in placement and in the 3D world, it's very easy to line up and to understand where those photos are supposed to go. Yeah, they're great. So I believe that's probably why. And this one has such great detailing too, as well, that it's another way to be like, yeah, this is not a hard piece to digitize. It wouldn't have stretched us.
So we urge you to go into the Roundhouse model and try and work out which of the objects are the ones that were scanned by from our collection. I hope you get them all. I'm just thinking, have we got any questions that have come through, or yeah, so that's an example of these are some of the wonderful finds from our period that we have scanned as part of the digitization of the site and the objects in our collection. If we haven't got any questions, have we? I just thought I'd ask before we move on. So Ian, what we'll do is, if we come outside the Roundhouse, we're just going to finish off now with a final few words on climate change and afforestation.
You do have some questions in the chat. If you look
right,
in the chat.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Let's have a look. Not sure how to go my head down. Oh, this is interesting. So we've got a little question here from Annabelle at Applecross Heritage Centre. And she says she's got some old Ordnance survey maps show hut circles on a headland in Applecross. And she says, would they be roundhouses or just shillings? Well, without actually going to the site, it's very difficult to tell. I think, I mean, shillings are usually smaller, although you can get small roundhouses, and the shilling sites, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to get into that, but sometimes they're usually along burns and or near water, but it would be very difficult to tell without actually going to visit the sites themselves. Have you had, oh, I got another good question here from that said, have you had a structural engineer model the roof? Well, we did consult a theoretical archaeologist, and I would like to praise the work, which I found exceedingly helpful, if I find it here. And it was the roof pitch. Let me get it here. Yeah, so I'll put the details in the stream, the news, the comments on the stream for you. But we did approach a structural archaeologist, and I've actually been using a lot of information on this particular resource that's out there that I've read. So no, we've not really. We've approached it according to looking at the evidence theoretically and building a roof that we feel supports our structure. But that by no means it's the only type of roof structure that we don't actually know what type of roof structure it would have been. So this is one option that we've gone for, and we think it works okay for our roundhouse. but there possibly might be other ways of roofing a roundhouse. So that is something I think that we definitely need to do more, have more information about. So iron or its manufacture. So we have some other questions here. I think we're running out of time a little bit, but just about about what about the use of iron and its manufacture at this time? It's a very interesting question. I think the use of iron, we don't know a huge amount in this particular area, but iron was probably something. We do have evidence of iron making. So we find the slag, the iron slag from iron manufacturer. So whether that dates back to the Iron Age, we would have to look at it as site by site for Kildonan and the iron smelting in Sutherland itself. And it would be a traded item as well. Iron would have been certainly part of the new technology, and itself in terms of the tools that you could make with iron really would have accelerated the deforestation of the woodlands that we see maybe still existing by the mid Iron Age, and certainly by the late Iron Age quite a significant amount of the forest would have come down by then. So I think iron is exceedingly important, but I wouldn't say that iron is something that we should just limit to this idea of an Iron Age, because if you go and read the Scarf research resource, we have iron being used possibly in the late Bronze Age, which has come out of excavation finds. So I think we have to be careful about when iron comes into use, when it is made, where it's made, and how it's traded. And it can give us sometimes a little bit of a false impression of what a community is doing. Iron is important, but I think that we need to do a lot more research to find its impact on these upland farming communities. And I think so. I think we possibly have. Is that our time up, guys? Okay, so I think we've run to about 3 o'clock, and I think that's probably I think that's probably about enough. I would just maybe like to thank you all for joining us for this presentation. We do have more presentations coming up. We'll be doing one on our Longhouse clearances township, and it's actually just a little bit further down the slope from the Roundhouse site, but obviously it's an early 19th century township. So we hope you'll join us for that event, and we'll be sharing the details on our Facebook pages very soon, so watch out for that. And as Ian, and thank you very much, Ian, Catherine and Alan and Sarah at the Open Virtual Worlds for hosting this event. And just before we go, Ian, if you could just put on the Timespan Real Rights exhibition, we'd love you to just have a little browse through our exhibition. I think you've got the title page there from our website. And please have a look at our Real Rights exhibition. It is cram-packed with lots of valuable research information. We've got our 3 models, we've got our 3D object on there as well. And the exhibition is really an interesting look on the Highlands and land use, and how the influence of the Highlands on colonized peoples, and also we reflect on the great changes that have taken place in terms of climate change. So there's an awful lot in that exhibition we think will be of interest, and you can keep on coming back again and again. So thank you very much, everyone, and I'll say goodbye, but thank you very much for coming along, and we hope you enjoyed it.